All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Christianity on the Spectrum. This is a podcast of around 12 years of ethnographic research into Christian and ex-Christian autistic subcommunities, primarily focusing on ASD1. And on this podcast, we like to talk about all things related to autism, Christianity, and the weird intersection between the two of them. And for this episode, we are going to be doing a much requested topic, which I have been putting off for various reasons. One of them is because it's very difficult and complex to properly talk about. So hopefully we'll do a good job. But we are going to be talking about OCD, and specifically the overlap between OCD and autism, the differences between OCD and autism, and the implications this has for Christianity and the various things to do that. And to help me, we have returning guest Susannah. Susannah was on the pod last to talk about, I don't know, we talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about false positives. We talked about the left brain, right brain. We talked about a bunch of stuff, but I wanted to get you on because when I was preparing this episode, I read a piece in Mere Orthodoxy by you about having OCD and theological reflection on OCD. And then we started talking, and I thought, I should ask her on the podcast to talk about this, and you graciously accepted. And so, Susannah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, yeah. So I am a journalist. I'm senior editor at Plough Quarterly, PLOUGH.com. So go there, subscribe. It's great. It's a kind of mere Christian journal. I'm also a senior editor at Mere Orthodoxy, which is why Jake lets me put all my crazy stuff on there, including that piece, which was kind of like so I wrote it at the request of the people at Desiring God, I think. And then they made it more normal and shorter. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But I asked whether it would be okay if I published the original version. And they said, yes. So I published the much weirder and longer version at Miro. And can we just drop that in the show notes at some point?
Yes. Yeah. Great. I'll put that in the details.
So as we probably covered last time in our very strange and fantastic conversation, I was not raised Christian. I'm half Jewish. I'm a New Yorker. I converted. It's very complicated, but I kind of started converting by reading a lot of C.S. Lewis when I was 15 and then ended up converting in a more intense way in grad school. I'm an Anglican. I'm married to a theologian called Alistair Roberts, who's great. Anyway, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, cool. So one of the reasons that I find this topic so difficult is because talking about OCD often makes OCD worse for people with OCD. And it makes them perseverate and think about things. And so I'm going to try to not trigger any particular OCD specific spirals. But this is something I have struggled with. I have never been clinically diagnosed with OCD. And if I have it, it is very mild. But religious scrupulosity is something that I definitely struggle with. And have struggled with for a while. If you have not listened to the episode about effective altruism, the two that we do, I have brought up my effective altruism brainworms many times, which is like the way that I experience religious scrupulosity is in that way, which is quite common for autistic people. So while I don't have a lot of the key components that you need to be clinically diagnosed with OCD, I do have a lot of the sort of standard telltale signs of struggling with religious scrupulosity. And I find that this is not something that Christians are particularly good at handling. One of the things I find, I don't know if you found this, is pastors and preachers and priests, they address the general congregation, right? They have a particular person in mind, and that person usually doesn't have religious scrupulosity. And so they will say things like, you need to really examine yourself and look for your sin. And that is often not a great thing to tell someone with religious scrupulosity. And so often the people that need to hear that message will not hear that message. And the people who don't need to hear that message, who already do it way more than they absolutely should, to the point where they become dysfunctional, they hear that message.
Yeah.
And
yeah. I mean, my experience with that is not so much that you need to examine yourself and although there is a certain amount of like effective altruism. I wouldn't have called it that because I always considered myself, that's not true. I probably didn't always consider myself a virtue ethicist or understand what that was. But the very unhelpful thing that I have had pastors say, and this is partly because I was converted finally, like, or more or whatever, in grad school at a vineyard church, is it's very important. Like, basically, what the Christian life is listening to the voice of the Holy Spirit and obeying him, like, immediately. And it was very much like, he's not going to go against what the Bible says, but there was quite a lot of teaching that was like, if the Holy Spirit tells you to do something, you should expect the Holy Spirit to be telling you to do specific things. And those experiences of command have the same authority as the Bible. And what the Christian life is to learn how to obey the Holy Spirit from moment to moment. And for both an autistic person and later a scrupulous person, that might mean like washing your hands 17 times or something like that. Probably not 17 because that's not a helpful number, but washing your hands 7 times or 10 times and not having any tools to be able to sort of push back and be like, if I feel that I need to do this or I am not morally okay, like I can actually like think about that. And so the vineyard was like both incredibly helpful for me because it was extremely aesthetically counter to my proclivities and also extremely supernaturalist. So God kind of was like, you can't just be aesthetic about this, although later on you'll have some liturgy and that's beautiful. And also you have to really get the fact that Jesus is not dead and that the Holy Spirit is active. And both of those, like, I really needed to hear. I really needed to, this is not pure philosophy. This is not just aesthetics. This is, salvation. And it's also extremely supernatural. And those were all good. However, because of the extreme subjectivity of that kind of experiential approach to what Christian discipleship looks like, it messed with me super bad.
Yeah, that is an extremely common experience. Religious OCD or OCD in general often comes with accompanying intrusive thoughts. And if you do not experience that and you do not know what it's like to have that, it might make sense for you to think about listening to that internal voice that is convicting you, especially convicting you of moral things. But when you have OCD, that voice is broken. It does not tell you many helpful things. In fact, it often tells you that you need to be doing things that aren't particularly helpful. And a lot of people just don't know that is even a human experience that you can have, or they interpret that as demon possession.
Oh, I never had that.
That has come up more than once, especially for people raised in like Pentecostal traditions. They go to their youth pastor in their teens and they explain what they are feeling internally, and their youth pastor goes, "Oh, I know what that is. You are demon possessed. Let's get rid of that demon." And it's like, you should probably go to cognitive behavioral therapy instead.
One of the things that was really helpful to me when I was thinking through this, because like so much of this also, like with the OCD part, maybe we could probably get back into like what is all this that we're talking about at some point, but let's charge ahead first and then circle back. Was like, okay, say this is the voice of God, or say this is the voice of a demon, which that was not something that I was worried about. If you take some like Zoloft and that like calms down, probably that's not the voice of God. Like, Zoloft does not calm down your conscience, even. Zoloft does not calm down your noetic sense. Not to be a dork, Thomist psychology and anthropology is really, really helpful. One of the many things that I would say to a person who is struggling with this is just get better philosophical and theological anthropology and start with St. Thomas. As limited as he is in many cases, he's great on this stuff. And also, I am an Anglican. I'm not a Roman Catholic, but the Roman Catholics are super, super good on this because they've just been dealing with this for like a really long time. And they're much, much more likely to know what it is. There is a website called Scrupulous Anonymous that's run by the Redemptorists, which is I think, Ignatians. It's just scrupulousanonymous.org. They're fantastic. There are a bunch of saints who had this and had like a diagnosis. And it's just much, much more helpful when you have a diagnosis. And like, obviously, there was no DSM in 16th century Spain, but they knew what this was. And they knew that it was not conscience. They knew that it was not the voice of the Holy Spirit. They knew it was just like some random brain thing. Or they probably would have said like a spleen thing, or I don't know what they thought, but they knew it was like basically physical. They could recognize that. And so it's just really helpful to dig back into that stuff. And yeah, and don't do what John Bunyan did. That's my main piece of advice. He just gutted it out, man. And he had nothing. He had like, he was he was like, I guess he was sort of like a reformed English Baptist kind of type. And they don't do tradition or finding out what other people have said a whole lot. And he just had it really bad. And Abounding Through the Chief of Sinners was actually very helpful to me to read when I was at my darkest place, not because he was being sane about it, but just because I was like, oh, I so see you, bro. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that was great. And, God finally just as a special grace kind of lifted this from him, but he had nothing but the immediate struggle for years and years and years. And then later he was like jailed by probably, I forget who it was, like an English monarch, possibly Queen Elizabeth. I can't remember. I don't, anyway. And he said that like being in jail for, I think, 12 years was a lot less bad than being in the depths of his scrupulosity. And also the theology that he was dealing with was much, I would say, differently bad than the kind of vineyard theology that I was dealing with, but very bad.
I have found that the Lutherans have been particularly helpful for me
Oh, they're fantastic
with
about this
religious scrupulosity. I think
because
of
Luther
like,
had it.
if yes, exactly. If you look at like the religious tech trees and like what they're specced out to do, like
Uh-huh.
Lutheranism seems tailor built to deal with religious OCD.
Yeah, that's because it was
That's my
invented
theory.
by a guy who had it.
Exactly, exactly. If in all of the religious traditions, the one with the strongest anti-scrupulosity tech have been the Lutherans, and I've personally found reading Lutherans to be quite helpful for me on this particular
Yeah,
topic.
yeah.
So yeah, let's circle back to what actually is OCD.
It's a neuropsychiatric disorder that has to do with the way that the habitual formation of your brain gets wired such that you can't stop thinking about stuff, so that you worry about stuff that you shouldn't worry about. These worries fall into very common patterns. There's this weird sense of like moral threat or existential threat. And so, like, the classic thing is if you've seen Monk, which is a great TV show that had Tony Shalhoub in it that my dad actually wrote for a while. It's pretty good. It's not totally wrong. But it is like, okay, you feel that you need to. So the classic case is like you left the house and you're like, did I turn off the gas? Did I turn off the burner? And you did, but you have to go back and check. And that sense of, that this is silly, that you didn't leave it on, but you have to go back and check. Like, that is the classic kind of OCD moment. And then it gets much more elaborate in various ways. And so the obsessions, like, you can't stop thinking, like, you cannot walk on to your work and just be like, I'm sure I turned it off, because you will not be able to stop thinking about it at all. Like, people will like talk to you and you'll be like not able to pay attention to them. So, and there's also this sense of like deep, I can't even describe it, because it's like I might die or I might be damned. And if you're not, religious, the sense of maybe I'll be damned is very weird. So it's sort of more like, well, maybe there'll be a nuclear war and it's my fault or something like that. Or, it's really weird, but it's this very sort of strong, slightly conscience flavored, slightly existential flavored um, sense of, you must fix this. You must. And because you're not crazy, this is not insanity. It's not, it's psychosis. You know that this is stupid, and that, so forget the, burner thing because that actually might result in an explosion hypothetically. But like, you know that if you stepped on a crack, that's not going to cause a nuclear war or your little brother's death. But you don't know it. You don't know it on an emotional level, and you don't know it on a level that couldn't let you stop thinking about it. So you just do what it takes to soothe yourself, essentially to soothe your nervous system, to, calm your mind down, and it usually doesn't work. And then you have to do it again. And then your brain might tell you, oh, well, you have to do it 10 times. And then you do it 10 times, and then finally it'll work. And then you can like get home and like whatever, like, I don't know, read a novel or something. But that was at least my experience of what like classical OCD felt like. And in my experience, there were times in high school when, I would get home. So I lived like a block and a half away from, I lived and still live because we're now living in the apartment that I grew up in because my mother is very generous. I would get off from the bus like a block and a half away from my home, and it would take me like an hour and a half to walk home because I would have to walk home in the right way. And it just sucks because it's stupid and you're embarrassed and you look weird and you know that you're the kind of person who like people are like trying not to look at because clearly there's something weird going on with them. Also, it's really boring. Like it's just super boring. Like maybe like if I'd been able to like listen to podcasts, I don't know. I had like a disc, man. I should have been listening to like CDs. It's so stupid. It's so annoying. And I got diagnosed pretty quickly, actually, and that was incredibly helpful because I was doing something in my dad's basement upstate where I had like I was at a sleepover. I was like 14 or something, and my friend was sleeping over, and I kept opening and closing the bathroom door because I felt like I had to, or like, terrible things would happen. And my dad came down and he was like, Susannah, can you please stop that? And he was irritated. And I was like, I feel like I have to. And he also has OCD, although he was not diagnosed until after I was. But he recognized what I was talking about and said, and there was just like this moment that I vividly, almost physically remember of feeling like, oh, he knows what I'm talking about. I'm not crazy. This is probably a thing of some kind. It's probably a psychological thing. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person or a lazy person or inconsiderate or, crazy or demonized or something. It's just a thing. And that led to me going to a shrink and getting diagnosed and getting put on medication and getting given CBT. And the way that medication for OCD works is it doesn't fix it. It like dials down the volume of the shrieking in your head enough so that you can then do cognitive behavioral therapy, and that rewires your brain. So that was very, very helpful. So that's OCD.
Yeah. Yeah. So my experience is like when I've heard other people talk about it, I go, oh, I have it to the degree where like medication takes it down too.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of my baseline. and so all I needed to deal with mine was just CBT to stop that. So like I used to have to take pictures of the doors that I locked on my phone.
Relatable.
Or else I wouldn't be able to go to sleep. Yep. It was just like, I need that picture. And if I need to take a picture of my keys in the door in the locked position before I left the house, or else I'd be like, I didn't lock the house. Someone's going to rob it. It got really bad in the military when we started to deal with life and death scenarios.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I can imagine that would.
Where I was like, if I do not work like 16-hour days, I'm going to be the reason my friends get killed.
Yes.
And so now this turned out amazing for my career. because it turns out when you work 16-hour days for like years on end, you get really, really good at your job in cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, and then I had a reputation for doing that, which got me more respect in the military, so that didn't help very much. And I still like have to deal with that. A very constant thing for me is repeated intrusive thoughts that I did something wrong in an investigation. So I do digital forensics. And so I did something wrong in that. I know I didn't do something wrong. I know I didn't miss anything, but it's like,
Yeah.
I missed something. We're going to get sued. The case is going to fall apart. We're going to die. Makes you really, really good at doing the investigation because you redo your analysis like 5 or 6 times. Um, Not great for the mental health, but that's basically been my experience with it as well. And I've managed to do enough CBT to get it down to like less neurotic. But yeah, the thing with autism is autism can often look a lot like that, because one of the things you talked about is a moral sense of like right and wrong, and
Hmm.
like not doing something is going to have large moral implications.
Hmm.
And that is very common for autistic people. It's like moral cognitive rigidity and black and white thinking is super common in that. And with OCD, you also get black and white thinking. And
Yep.
it's just black and white thinking of a slightly different shape and color, but it can often look very similar. And so the rigidity and the black and white thinking happen. And then also strict adherences to principles. You know, autistic people will build moral codes in their head, especially younger autistics will build these like really rigid deontological frameworks of
Hmm.
right and wrong, and then hold themselves to that framework
Hmm.
that they have arbitrarily created in their head. And then when they mess it up, they start going, oh, I'm a bad person. This is going to implode on me. So, an example of that is my wife's best friend got a speeding ticket. And then she got a speeding ticket and she's like, oh no, what if I murder someone now that I got a speeding ticket? And she does not have OCD, but she has autism. And that, like, well, I've broken one rule. What's going to stop me in the future from breaking another rule? It's
That is
like,
actually that is not very OCD-ish or scrupulous in my experience. That's a bit different because it's more rational. And one thing about
I don't think
OCD,
that's rational.
no,
I
okay, that's not rational. But the sense, yeah, well, no, I guess that's true because there is the kind of, especially, and we can probably get into this now, but like with scrupulosity, there's a sense, at least for me, there is a major sense of what this is about is I'm disobeying God, and this is very relational. And especially the kind of Christianity that I was taught was very relational. And also, I do have, you know, I experience a relationship with God. And so it felt like I'm turning away from him. And so if I turn away from him in this small way, what will happen to me next? Because I'll steer my conscience and then I won't be able to hear from him anymore. And so that was kind of the way that got processed into Christianity for me.
Yeah, and so that I think segues us well into religious scrupulosity, which is sort of like, what if your religion had OCD?
Yeah.
And you know, is basically it's you take all the OCD habits and the OCD machinations that you get, and you go, well, what if the divine
Yeah.
also feels this? So a really common one that gets brought up is the unforgivable sin
Hmm.
mentioned in the gospel,
Uh-huh.
which is cruelly left unspecified as to what it exactly means.
It's
Um,
probably mercifully left unspecified, but we don't know why.
sure, there are many ways of interpreting the lack of specificity as to what exactly it is, but often blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. So let's say you have these religious OCD tendencies, and you think, oh no, what if by not washing my hands the correct number of times, I have committed blasphemy against the Holy Spirit and I am forever damned. Oh
Relatable.
no. Yeah.
Yeah.
and
Or yeah.
and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And oh, I have sinned, and now since I have sinned, you know, all of these, like, my I'm going to get cancer
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Although, so there's two things that I would say. One is usually when it gets to the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit stage, it's not something like washing your hands. It's more like I didn't approach that person who I felt like God was telling me to go evangelize. So it's a little bit more like rational in that sense. And then also, usually there's never a sense of despair. There's always a sense of like bees battering against a window pane, squirrels, chattering, trying to like scrabble through like glass. You might be able to fix it. If you despaired, you would like be at peace, but you might be able to fix it. And you might be able to fix it in like a number of ways that your brain comes up with. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's always this sort of sense of like horrible hope. Yeah. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. There's also another factor, which is, when Jesus in the Gospels talks about if you hate your brother in your
Oh, yeah.
heart, you have committed murder, or if you
Yeah.
so much as think about a woman lustfully, you have committed adultery. That one, I have been reliably informed, is not a fun time for teenage boys
I
with
can imagine.
OCD.
Yeah. I feel like for some reason, I did have many ruminations that kind of falls into rumination territory to a certain degree. That never got me for some reason, but many other versions of that did. So, yeah.
So yeah, that's basically what religious scrupulosity is. And it's one of those things that if you don't experience it, it's very hard to explain what it's like to experience it, because people will feel religious conviction and they'll be like, I feel the Holy Spirit compelling me, or like I feel convicted by God. And it's like, okay, well, what if you felt that 1,000 times a day about stupid things,
Yeah.
and it never stopped and you couldn't get it to go away? And so
Exactly.
I went through, while serving at the Easter Vigil this year, I was the subdeacon at the Easter Vigil, and I parked in a parking spot, and I wasn't sure if I had parked within the lines because there was snow. And the entire Easter Vigil,
You felt like you were
in
impure
my
and
head,
you
yes,
couldn't take communion, you were not fit to
yeah,
serve, you were going to damn yourself.
yes. And
Yeah,
I was like, am I taking communion
unworthily.
unfit? And as
I
a
might, I might
subdeacon,
be
am
about to
I
die.
administering? And then I was like, wait a second, I'm doing a donatism. No.
Don't ever go full donatist. Never
Yes.
go full donatist.
And that
Honestly,
was enough to snap me out of it, is to
yeah.
realize like, oh, I'm
This
committing
is what you
heresy
actually
right
don't.
now.
It's so good. Honestly, this is why I love one of the great gifts of liturgical and historical Christianity is it can tell you when you're being totally crazy, because so much of I don't know what percentage of people, in history have had scrupulosity, but I feel like the percentage of people who have probably have been really loud about it. And yeah, you can totally imagine like Donatus, or like you can imagine like all of these people who are freaking out about the potential that the pastor was like in sin when he was baptizing you or something. That's what scrupulous people do. That's what they do. Yeah,
I also
and
think scrupulous people just tend to be a lot more religious than non-scrupulous people,
that's interesting to me.
because the sense of urgency that you need to be doing it is there in a way that it might not be for a person who doesn't experience it. It's not to
Yeah,
say you can't be devout if you're non-scrupulous, but if you are scrupulous and in a context in which religion is taken for granted, you are probably going to be more serious about that than the other people
yeah.
near you, because you have
You
this
will have
voice in
no
your
chill.
head.
You will have no chill. That's kind of what it
Exactly.
is. Yes.
Yeah,
Anyway,
and you might start a whole new denomination because of it.
you
And
sure
schism
might.
with the church.
Maybe no names. Have you
um,
read? I have a question. Have you read Speaker for the Dead? The
I've
Orson
not.
Scott? Okay, please. Have you read Ender's Game?
I have, yes.
Okay. Speaker for the Dead has a depiction of someone who has scrupulosity, and the basis of the religion in this world is scrupulosity. And it's terrifying because you're like, wait, is this just like being really devoutly Jewish or something? And so one of the things that like because there's all this purity stuff in Orthodox Judaism. And one of the many things that, both being what I think God was like showing people through the Old and New Testaments, and also like what he showed me through whatever kind of Christian maturity I've hopefully attained, is that actually you can tell the difference between conscience and scrupulosity, and also religion is not the same as this kind of compulsion. Although that's really hard, and it's so much harder than people who don't know what you're talking about think.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you try to explain it to normal people and they just don't get it. So
Mm-hmm.
this is something that comes up a lot for autism research. I'll describe autism like missing social cues and things like
Uh-huh.
that, and people are like, everyone misses social cues, and it's like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah.
It's all the time. And
Yeah.
so so the way I describe it is you need to understand frequency and intensity,
Mm-hmm.
and it's your normal experiences, and those dials get cranked up to a
You will love it.
degree
Yep.
that you just can't explain unless you were there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And like I have thankfully got off pretty light, that I haven't needed medication to do it, and like I get off pretty well these days, where I can, I will still fall down into scrupulosity spirals on occasion, but I've built out a lot of like cognitive tech to stop me from doing it in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
cases. But
Yep.
so this is really a really common thing in my data set. And so I'll just go over the stats I've collected on this. So 8% of late diagnosed autistics in my interviews were diagnosed with OCD previous to autism, but have said, I don't think that was right. I think I was misdiagnosed with OCD. They
Mm-hmm.
tend to be older, and they tend to be women. So 6% of that 8%
Mm-hmm.
are women, and 2% are men. So
Okay.
it's much more common for autistic women to be misdiagnosed with OCD first, and then diagnosed with autism, where they likely have OCD at like that same level that I do, and their autism gets missed, but the OCD gets, the like mild grade OCD gets picked up. 13% actually have like clinically diagnosed OCD at a young age. So 13% of the people that I interview have that. 9% of those are women, and 4% are men
So these are
of those 13.
of people who have been diagnosed eventually with autism as
Yeah.
well.
So they
Okay.
were initially diagnosed with OCD
Okay.
as in like their early childhood, adolescence, and also diagnosed with autism. So like there's around 13% of the people that I interview have both,
Mm-hmm.
very clearly have both, and have been clinically diagnosed with both. 8% were probably, either mild OCD and like ASD1, and they only got the OCD first because they were just overlooked for autism. And then 4% very clearly have undiagnosed OCD, but just haven't dealt with it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's around 3% of women and 1% of men. So I looked at like meta-analyses of OCD by gender, and it looks like in just the general population, OCD is about 1.5 to 2.5 times more common in women than it is men.
That's
Um,
interesting. I feel like when I was diagnosed, it was kind of assumed to be more men, or
yes,
more boys rather.
yeah, that was how it was, but now there's like in corrected studies past 2016,
Okay.
the gender ratios are significantly more women than men, and in my data samples, women with OCD outnumber them 2.5 to 3 times. Um, when I just look at it, especially like when I just do data scraping, and OCD people with OCD are one of the highest rates of false positives that I get in my data set, just because a
Mhm.
lot of OCD like thinking tends to look like autism, which is something we talked about in our previous episode. But
Yeah. Although
yeah.
I'm so interested to like when you I don't know. I'm an English major. I don't know what data scraping is. What, like, are there things that people's like phrases they use? Like what is it that you're looking for?
Oh yeah, so like they say they have OCD.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's
so like at some point in their posting, they will say my OCD, or
okay.
I have OCD, or like OCD, and then I will usually follow up with a message or a DM saying, hey, I saw you said you had OCD. I'm an independent autism researcher that looks at Christian and ex-Christian communities. Can you just verify that you actually have OCD and we're just meaning it in a colloquial sense? Because that's a very common problem, right? Because like a lot of people say I have OCD and it's like, you don't have OCD, you have mild anxiety.
Or you're like a type A person who's trying to advertise themselves as being really good at housekeeping.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like,
Not to be whatever.
Yeah, I don't think it's like when people use the term autism to mean good with computers. It's like there's a little more to this than what you might be understanding. So that's from that. So when I do what are called EVRs, I call them EVRs or external validation requests, which is when I track someone, I then send out an automated message to them or just message them directly. If I can't tell, like if I can't tell, I will send it out asking if they have autism or if they have OCD or if they have ADHD or whatever. In 48% of negative ERVs turn out to be OCD. So when I reach out and say, hey, I've been tracking your posts, I study autism in Christian and ex-Christian communities, do you have autism? Of those who say no, 48% of them say no because of OCD.
Because they feel like they would be lying if they said yes?
No, because they have OCD.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. That I do wonder, like, this is actually a whole kind of meta question because like you've talked a lot about how in autistic, like for autistic people, if they're not 100% sure,
yes,
they will say no. And I do wonder whether that is resulting in a lot of underdiagnoses of both autism and OCD.
Yes, probably, which is why I do longitudinal follow-ups with all of the people that have failed ERVs. It is a not insignificant number of people that I will reach out to and be like, hey, do you have autism? And they'll be like, no, what are you talking about? And then 3 years later, they're like, my kid just got their autism diagnosis, and I think I might have it too. And it's like, ha, got you.
Well, but also it's not just that. It's not just the sort of underdiagnosis thing. It's the sense of like, if I say that I have X and I don't, I will be lying, and that will make me a bad person.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's also another thing where, like, you know, being in denial about it because there's small amounts of uncertainty leading you to misreport is, again, a thing you have to account for, which is one of those things that you can't really account for unless you just follow them over time.
Yeah.
And eventually, especially if their life gets more stressful, it will boil over to a point where they have to stare into the face of a diagnosis, whether they particularly want to or not.
So one of the things that is annoying about me is that I really love being Anglican because it means that I don't have to like sign up to any particular confession other than, you know, the creed.
Yes. Very common.
And I, like, when I joined my Anglican church, I was like, I am not sure about the 39 Articles. Is that okay? And my pastor was like, you're not getting ordained. What are you talking about? Are you crazy?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I do have some stuff though. Anyway, so one of the beautiful things about the Anglican tradition is that it just makes me feel like, okay, I'm morally certain that Jesus isn't dead. Like, I am throwing my life and my soul on that and on the truth of the creeds. I'm not doing that on the Westminster Confession. And apparently not everyone thinks about the 39 Articles or the Westminster Confession as like, I'm throwing my salvation on that if I subscribe to those. And I don't understand that.
It is a mind-blowing thing when you realize those people exist, where it's like, oh, you don't think about these kind of things? What do you mean you don't have to actively consider this? But yeah, so that is one of the reasons why Anglicanism is the largest by head count.
Interesting.
And percentage of autistic people. Doctrinal flexibility is massive. It is a huge thing for autistic people. And like, I would suspect also with people who have OCD, because you get that. So it's very common for for autistic people to be LCMS, right? So
Mhm.
by percentage, LCMS has the largest amount of autistic people per capita.
Because their
It is,
theology is really good at calming you down.
yes. It is, however, very common for them to leave the LCMS and join ACNA or like the
Mhm.
ACNA because they start having questions about young earth creationism, and they're not sure how they can make that square and still be like Lutheran, but they're like, I think I could be an Anglican and do this. And
And they also think that they need to, like, sign up to that in order to take communion at
yep,
their LCMS church.
yep. And the reason I am not Lutheran is because I read through the large catechism and the small catechism
Mhm.
and the Book of Concord, and I went, okay, currently right now I could sign on the line for these things. But what if in 2 years' time I
Mhm.
read something and it makes me change my mind?
Exactly, exactly. Thank you, Don.
Then what?
Thank you.
Then what's going to happen?
Why I didn't join Redeemer. I love Tim Keller. I love Redeemer. I mean, it was really big and kind of whatever. I'm very happy to be Anglican but yeah, I'm like, I don't I can't sign on to the Westminster Confession.
Yeah.
Not because I disagree with it, because I don't know. Like,
Yeah,
and
and it's like, and if I happen to currently be wrong about something, I will update my beliefs to
yes,
be
and then
more
I will
correct.
feel horrible, and then I'll feel horrible, and I'll have made all these friends, and
Yes.
then I'll have to feel like I have to leave, and no one will understand why, and they'll think I'm weird, and then I'll be all alone again.
Yes, exactly. Like literally word for word my thoughts, and and then I'll have like a family, we'll have kids who will
Yeah.
be in the LCMS, and they'll have friends, and we'll be like, daddy has to not go to church with you guys anymore because he has some particular differences and interpretations of
Yes,
Galatians
he's
now.
got some private reservations, and he's not sure that private reservations are okay, even though he's not a pastor. Like,
Yes.
hey,
and,
wait, are you
and
ACNA? Are you Anglican?
I'm Anglican Church of Canada
Amazing.
on the conservative Anglo Catholic like I'm in a prayer book society church. I don't know
Amazing.
if that means
Oh,
anything to
yeah.
you.
No, that's
Um,
fantastic. Do you know Ben Crosby?
I do. He's been on this podcast twice.
Oh, bless him.
Yes. So I'm a Ben Crosby Anglican. I go to an Anglo Catholic church not because I'm particularly Anglo Catholic or particularly drawn to the Anglo Catholic um mass. I'm more of like a high church
Prayer
Protestant
book. Yeah, yeah.
prayer book who likes the high church. However, I was incredibly disappointed with the Anglican Church's response to Maid,
Yeah.
and I felt like I would be sinning if I were to partake in communion with those churches.
Okay, fair, but also
That I
that's
know
don
it's not true.
that's donatism. I get it,
I
but
know
also Ben has been so good about this stuff.
he has been excellent on it. In fact, the episode that we did on Maid was with Ben.
Oh my gosh.
So we're all Ben Crosby fans
Yes,
on
we
this
are. You know,
podcast.
he and Sarah
Um,
and Alistair and I were married literally on the same day in 2022. And like we share a friend group to the degree that like it was kind of good that we were physically far apart, because that meant that like our friends weren't like choosing between the weddings to go to.
yeah, and so like for me, I go to this Anglo Catholic church because the first Sunday I showed up, the homily, the priest was going off about how Maid was an affront to God
Amazing.
and human dignity, and I'm like, all right, I can do this one.
Yeah.
This will be good.
Uh,
um, yeah, don't and they didn't feel it necessary to change the words in the prayers to Mother God or
oh,
openly deny the virgin birth on Christmas Eve
can
and stuff like that.
we talk? Okay, the one way in which my scrupulosity has served me is that I was the first time I was baptized. It was at Riverside Cathedral in New York, where my grandpa went, and so it's a UCC church. The joke is that stands for Unitarians Considering Christ. I I was it was I don't remember, and there's no certificate, etc. It was probably Creator, Christ, and Holy Ghost. I don't remember. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. But I did then later, after being like a sort of Christian journalist for a couple of years, come to realize that's not a Trinitarian formula. And so I talked to both my pastor and Father Thomas Joseph White, who's this wonderful Catholic priest. And they were both, no, actually, you do need to get conditionally baptized. That is a real thing. Like, that's not a fake thing. That's not you being anxious. You just have to get conditionally baptized. And there you go. So I was.
Yeah. You know, this is like, I'm not going to lie. There have been instances in my life in which I have realized, oh, this sort of intensive scrupulosity is somewhat adaptive. Like
Yeah.
it does, while most of your life it makes you miserable, there have been some instances in which I'm like, ooh, it was very good
Yes.
that I went back to check, which
Yes.
makes it worse
I know.
overall.
I
Right?
know.
Because you're like, I was rational, I was right, I was justified in feeling
almost
that
feel
way.
guilty for saying that, for telling my anecdote about that, because like I don't want to make anyone worse. At the same time, it's got to be a Trinitarian formula.
Yeah. And I get that. I get that. And like, so when you look at the overlap of autism and OCD, around, depending on which surveys you look at, but of the large scale surveys that have been conducted, it's around 10 to 20% of people who have autism have also been diagnosed with OCD.
Okay.
And it's around 2% of the general population.
Okay.
So it's about 10 times more likely
Yes.
than in the general population if you also have autism. It's around, of those with OCD, around 6 to 12% of them have autism, and autism is in around 3% of the general population.
So,
And
twice to
so
4 times.
yeah. So both of them are very commonly co-occurring with each other,
Okay.
much more than you get in the general population. And so there are a lot of weird overlaps and intersections, but it's also a fruitful study for like control groups, right? Because you could look at the ones who are only autistic and the ones who have both and the ones who just have OCD, and you can look at how they intersect with Christianity. And so I've done quite a bit of that. I've done interviews with Christians who only have OCD but not autism as controls, because there are many things within Christianity where I'm like, okay, is this like an autism thing, or is this like an overall mental illness thing? Is this just something that people with like aberrant mental conditions do? And some of the times it's like, yep, this is not actually an autism exclusive thing.
It's
This
just
is
neuro
just
weirdos.
yes.
Yeah.
when your brain develops along a certain pathway, these are sort of emergent properties of Christianity through that lens.
So describe that to me. I'm so curious.
Yeah, so
Both of the contrasting things. Like,
yeah, it is really hard to like tangibly describe the like, okay, this is exactly it, because you know, these are all on distributions, right? And the borders here are a little porous and there's fuzziness here. But like posting styles, even like the weirdest thing is like posting styles, interest in memes and subcultures, the writers they're interested in, and the writers they tend to be very interested in. So Simone Weil comes up an enormous amount in
oh
people with
boy.
OCD and people with autism.
I edited a book of Simone Weil. I really disagree with her profoundly. But I really also appreciate her.
Also, just like poster girl for religious OCD and
Yeah.
religious scrupulosity, like
Moral
just like,
OCD in particular. Like,
oh
not,
yeah,
yeah, if she'd
refusing
had
to
a
be
little more,
baptized.
yeah, if she'd had a little more, like, just whatever. I'm sorry. Like, I could go down this rabbit. I love Simone. I think she'll ultimately be fine. I just, whatever.
Yeah, she had a absolutely wild life that is characterized by scrupulosity to a insane degree. And it's one of those things that makes her as interesting as she is, but also like, you know, not someone I would encourage people to emulate,
No,
is
do
I
not
think the
give
way.
your slightly autistic or slightly OCD teenage daughter the Simone Weil book that I edited to read. Do not.
Correct. Do not give anyone a Simone Weil book if they have autism or OCD and
Yeah.
they have already not dealt with those issues. If they
Yeah.
have not dealt with those issues, they do not need to know who Simone Weil is. They do not need
Don't.
to read about Simone Weil.
No, they sure don't.
This is a cognitive hazard of
Yes.
11 out of 10 cognitive hazard for our people.
And John Bunyan. Although I mean Pilgrim's Progress is fine, but like John Bunyan, like the rest of John Bunyan.
Give them Martin Luther.
Give them
That's
Martin Luther.
not
Or
on the Jews and their lies.
no,
Not
no,
on that one.
no. But the rest of Luther, what else? Certain aspects of Therese of Lisieux. Therese
Yep.
is great. She had it. She was, she had great spiritual counseling. She was like just dialed back down from it excellently. Ignatius of Loyola had it and kind of had to invent a whole structure to deal with it. But it's a weird structure because it actually, if you take it wrong, it gives you worse OCD, but if you take it right, it gives you better. Like it helps it. Anyway, there are just a ton. Like go to
Yep.
Scrupulous Anonymous, go to the Redemptorists. This is not, you're not, yeah, it's fine.
This is thankfully one of those things that is very well trodden within the Christian tradition and comes up once every like 10 years in a Christian's writing. So, you have like 20,000 different things written about it
Yeah,
from all sorts of people from
yeah,
across the spectrum, where you could basically, if you want to find someone within your tradition, you probably can find someone
yeah,
who is struggling with this and
yeah.
who has dealt with this. So yeah, things in common: obsessiveness and rumination.
Mm-hmm,
And obsessiveness and rumination in posting
mm-hmm.
comes up a lot. It's like, oh, they're posting about this again.
Boy, I used to do that so badly.
Yep. Yep.
Ah,
And extreme rumination about moral issues,
mhm.
and moral issues that do not ultimately have a lot of weight. So, getting really upset that someone changed the wording in the liturgy in a way that doesn't actually impact any of the formulas or anything like that. Like,
Like not
they
not
use,
around like not around the words of institution, but just like something else.
yes, or they use prayer B, or they, God forbid, they use the Book of Alternative Services. Something like that. And so lots and lots of posting about that. A very common trend between the two groups is being in a tradition that does not account for the fact that you have something going on neurologically that most other people don't. And so getting absolutely terrible advice from your priests and pastors on how to
Vineyard,
do it, and that
vineyard.
makes it worse.
Yes, vineyard.
Yes. Yes.
Charismaticism, very problematic.
Yes, if you have OCD, I would not recommend a charismatic or Pentecostal tradition. Just in general, will not go well. Many, many concerns about not being able to live up to the standards of the religious demands that are placed on you. A lot of posting about wanting to be a monk or a nun,
Yeah.
or like the idea that it's like living my normal life is not good enough. I
Mhm.
must devote myself fully to religious practice.
Can I tell you? Wait, can I tell you a small story?
Yes.
Okay, so when I was first converted, I made friends with, and there was a little bit OCD-ish the way that this happened, but I made friends with this street preacher in Boston who used to just sort of do street preaching, and I was very worried at the time that uh, if I didn't drop out of grad school and move to Baltimore and become a peripatetic street preacher, then I would be damned. And to be clear, there's no background to this. Very frequently in OCD or scrupulosity stuff, like there's no reason. It's a thing that gets in your head.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I thought that the street preacher would be the one to tell me the truth. He'd be the one to like really like not give me an out. And I asked him about this, and he said, I think you should probably stay in grad school. And I'm very grateful for that. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So not everyone is as lucky. Some people get told, yeah, God is calling you to a mission in Baltimore, and they
Yeah.
go there and they screw up their life.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that is a non-trivial number of cases. I I sometimes give talks to groups of pastors, and they ask me, like, what types of things do I need to be prepared for? And one of the things that I have to explain is, at some point, if you are dealing with a population of autistic people, you need to be prepared to explain to someone why they should not get a cross tattooed on their forehead.
Yep.
And you need to be serious about it.
Yep.
And you need to understand they are not trolling. They genuinely think they should get a cross tattooed on their forehead, and
Yep.
you have to talk them out of it.
Yep.
I have done this 7 times.
Not something that ever occurred to me, but I can totally see it. I can totally see it. One of the things, yeah, one of the things that is really great about the Bruderhof, which is the Christian community that it publishes Plow, they're sort of like married monastics, is that when you want to join them, you have to say that you are joining for the joy and delight of your heart. It's like driven by joy. And joy is not the same as I'm driven by a passionate craving to experience psychic relief. Those are not the same thing. And so understanding that doing something to like calm your psycho bad conscience that isn't even really conscience, but is just like neurological noise, is not the same as doing something for the joy and delight of your heart. And that's important.
Yeah. And so on that is a lot of attempts to build like Wile E. Coyote style traps to get rid of your own psychic torment. You know, like if I will build this elaborate Rube Goldberg machine, and if I just build it right, then I'm finally going to be rid of my burdensome conscience. And if I just get it, then it's going to be right.
A rule
Very
of life.
common.
A rule of life.
Yes,
which is
exactly.
Great.
Yeah, it's great for some people, for sure. But yeah, another really, really common thing in both cases is, why isn't everyone taking this as seriously as I am?
Oh my gosh, you feel so lonely.
Yep. And you're like, I am the only Christian in my church who really cares about this. And often that's not true, but you feel it's true because you're like, look, if you actually believe this is true, you should follow your beliefs to the extent of their logical conclusions. And that means throwing away your life and doing an incredibly dangerous thing for you. And the fact that people aren't doing that just shows that they don't actually care.
Yeah. So who's the prophet who's like, I'm the only one left who is not bad than Nijabal? I forget. I forget who it is. But anyway, it's an Old Testament prophet, and he's like complaining to God that like he's the only one who takes this seriously. And God is like, no, you're delusional. That's not true. And that's so good to hear.
Yeah. And so that is a really, really common thing. And often, frequent, if they're in a tradition with confession, they very frequently post about going to confession. And a lot of those times it's like, good on those priests for doing confession so frequently. And another one that comes up with those people is posts about how my priest told me I don't need to go to confession so often.
Yeah.
So that happens. A lot of sort of emergent properties come from rumination and obsession. And rumination and obsession are both common to OCD and autism, but they don't necessarily always pan out the same way. Like autistic people tend to get focused on a particular narrow topic, whereas people with OCD tend to get more fixated on averting disaster. Now, again, you can get both. You can be very interested in the topic so that you can avert disaster, but it's, yeah. So
AI alignment.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Oh, don't get me started. Okay. We're not
going there. We're not going there. It's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. We'll get there eventually. I have recorded and cut at least 4 different AI rants from this podcast before publishing, because it's like I just went off and I shouldn't be going off. Anyway, staying on topic. But yes, the quality of life is just down, right? So when compared to most Christians, it's very difficult to have these things and just have to live with them. Both are disabling. Sometimes they're disabling in similar ways, but often different. But there is often overlap in the way it impacts your quality of life. The unfortunate thing is that autism is much harder to treat than OCD. So OCD is easier to treat because you have medication that can calm the thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that, which are like pretty concrete methods to learn how to control things. That being said, I don't know what your experience is, but it's never fully gone away. It just goes to a lower noise level where now I can tolerate it.
I mean, it's gone to a much, much lower noise level for me, like to the point that it basically feels like it's basically gone away, but also I'm older than you. Also, it's really, it's been a long journey. Like, I don't feel like I suffer from, like, I feel like I've been given, I'm actually grateful for it at this point and not in a like weird way. Like, it's taught me so much about things that I really care about, including like what the intellect is, what the will is, what conscience is, like what tradition is for. I'm just, yeah. And one of the reasons that I was eager to do this podcast is that the piece that I wrote for Jake is the piece that, I've written a ton of stuff. I've written so much stuff. And that piece was the piece that people contact me about the most and say, thank you, this helped me. And I was like, oh, okay, probably God wants me to talk about that more, even though it's not like post liberalism or like the ontology of AI or like all of
Yeah.
my other weird like interests. Anyway.
Yeah. And so that is a much more common trend,
Mhm.
is if you get older and you work at it, OCD may never fully go away, but it will go down to comfortable levels. Unfortunately, autism tends to stay at around the same level of
Mhm.
impairment throughout your life. Often it gets worse.
Hmm.
So the amount of impairment you feel from autism can get much worse, even if you try to manage it. Just because, like, when you have kids,
Mhm.
that's when it starts to become like really unmanageable.
Interesting.
But things like that happen, and then things get injected into your life. Whereas OCD is easier to keep at bay. I describe my experience with OCD similar to my experience with gender dysphoria. So I wrote a post about this, and I just read the post on the podcast called I had teenage gender dysphoria. Now I don't, and it feels weird. And the post is basically about how I had transient teenage gender dysphoria as a teen, and I think it's an OCD autism combo thing, like a mild OCD, because that's the best way I can experience it. Like an
Mhm.
OCD about gender is how it felt, but now I don't really experience it. It's just gone down to a low enough level where it's just super tolerable and I can live with it.
Mhm.
That's sort of where I feel with with like the just general OCD, except I gender dysphoria doesn't flare up for me. Like, I don't
Mhm.
have bouts of it. I don't ever go into gender dysphoria spirals.
Mhm.
Whereas I still have religious scrupulosity spirals, despite my
Yeah.
best effort to not have them. However, I will usually be able to kick myself out of them within an hour or so.
Yeah.
Like, I can recognize, oh, I'm spiraling. Oh, this is bad. Okay, remember your training.
Yeah.
And then just fall back into that, and then pull myself out of it,
Yeah.
or tell someone that I'm spiraling and I need to talk to them, and we'll pull ourselves out together.
Mhm.
Or, I had a weird ass, like, OCD scrupulosity spiral over buying a new jacket this winter because my old jacket had a tear, like, from the elbow down to like the midsection through the armpit, and I'm
Mhm.
like, I really should get a new jacket. And I was like, but think about how many malaria nets I could have bought instead. And
Yeah.
I had like a monumental crash out about
Yeah.
that. And I was explaining it in in my Discord, and all of the autists in my Discord were like, John, stop being stupid, buy the jacket. You're being irrational. This doesn't
Yeah,
make sense.
yeah.
Here are all the different things that you need to consider.
But I totally get my first sort of moral OCD, but again, like it's sort of like, yeah, but this is also like just the awakening conscience, and it's also social responsibility. Is I can remember the first time I learned about Nike having slave labor factories, I felt a mission to go to all the boys, like all the third grade boys or whatever in my class, and be like, you have to not buy Nikes because they have slave labor factories. Or I just said Nike has slave labor factories, and they were like, "What are we going to do? Like, not buy Nikes?" And I was like, "Yes, you have to not buy Nikes."
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. On one level, yes, you have to not buy Nikes. Maybe on the other level, like, there's a way to think about this that does not contribute to anyone's flourishing.
Yes. Yeah, so this came up in my last episode on effective altruism when we were talking about animal suffering
Uh-huh.
and the problem of animal suffering.
Yeah.
And JD, bless his heart, is not used to talking to people who have to deal with religious scrupulosity. And he's like, well, isn't it a good idea to just hold these ideas in tension and just keep them with you? And it's like, no, it is
Really
actually
not.
not.
That is not what
It,
you should do.
it will drive me insane, and I will become so much less productive that I won't be able to do my job, and I won't get money, and I won't be able to donate to the Against Malaria Foundation. So
Yeah.
no, it's actually not a good idea to hold these
Yeah.
in tension.
Yeah.
It's a good idea to hold to a virtue ethics.
Yes.
And so that is another interesting commonality.
Oh, yeah.
For people who have the autism OCD combo, moral systems usually start with some form of deontology and then morph
Or
into
utilitarianism.
yeah,
Or
or
utilitarianism.
utilitarian. And then like the path to recovery is
It's
virtue
virtue.
ethics.
Yeah, because then
In
you
many
start to like
senses, yes.
feel okay about caring about yourself.
Yes. And it is the thing that a lot of people need to survive
Yes.
is cultivating a sense of virtue ethics and, like, accept the things I cannot change, courage to
Yep.
change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the
know
difference.
Yep.
Getting serenity pilled, as I
Yep.
call it.
Yeah.
And so that's like a really big factor that overlaps between the two is
Yeah.
the common form of moral reasoning trends, like of healthy recovery, trends towards virtue ethics.
Virtue ethic. Absolutely, in my case, 100%.
Yeah. So things that aren't similar, I'm going to try to resist the urge to say, well, some have autism and some have OCD, and those are different conditions. So I'm going to try not say that, but to some extent, that is what's not similar. It's like, well, the ones with OCD don't have autism. So people with OCD, but not autism, have social integration challenges that are often related to intrusive thoughts or obsessive and disruptive behavior because of those intrusive thoughts. So the example you gave earlier of, opening and closing the door over and over and over, that's very hard to deal with if you're at a girl's sleepover and you're opening and closing the door and they're like, what's wrong with this freak? But that is a different form of social challenge than autistic people have. People with OCD don't struggle because they're missing social cues or because they find people genuinely perplexing or that they don't understand what's going on. They struggle with social integration because OCD causes odd behaviors and it causes you to do weird things or behave in weird ways. And so people find them odd, and being odd creates social ostracization. However, they still tend to be good at emotional reasoning. They tend to be good at emotional reciprocity. They don't struggle turn taking. So when I'm having conversations with autistic people, it's often I lecture you, you lecture me, I lecture you, you lecture me. And that's how it works. But with interviews I have with OCD people, it's very obvious that they know how to engage in like relational reciprocity as most people do. And it's like, ooh, this person knows how to have a conversation, which is not always the case that you get with autism. And so they tend to reason about people, emotions, and relationships very differently. So like autistic people, like 85% of us don't report being able to make sense of the idea of a personal relationship with Jesus. That's not really an issue that people who only have OCD have.
Mhm.
Usually the relational and the relating to God part of it is not unintuitive to them. It might not always be directly intuitive because it's not directly intuitive to everyone, but it's just not an overall general trend that I found.
And it can also be, one of the hard things about moments of scrupulosity for me has been the sense of like turning away in an interpersonal
Yeah.
way from God and like worrying that
Yeah.
he's going to turn away interpersonally from me.
Yeah. And so like that for people with OCD, they're like, I'm worried God will turn away and I will be closed off. And the people with autism are like, wait, you're not closed off 24/7? That's weird. Or like, oh, first time he's turned off on you. Welcome to the club, my friend. But yeah, so the so autism has two criterias in the DSM: criteria A and criteria B. Criteria A is deficits in social emotional reciprocity across multiple contexts, and criteria B is restrictive and repetitive behaviors. Criteria A is the one that OCD people do not share a whole lot with. Criteria B is the one that there is much more OCD overlap in.
Yeah.
So restrictive and repetitive behaviors, they come from different places though. So the reported internal experience, if you don't have both, is different. Like the obsessiveness in autism is not intrusive. It
Can you
is
describe that?
pleasurable.
Okay.
So it feels regulating and it feels calming and it feels good to like obsess about things, which is not how it feels when you have OCD.
It sure doesn't.
Right? And
I
so
mean,
with OCD,
there are things that I am like super obsessed with, but like that feels very different
yes,
than OCD.
OCD feels internally, the obsessiveness and rigidness feels restrictive and imprisoning.
And
Whereas,
we know it's crazy. We know it's
yes,
dumb. And it
and
feels boring.
yeah, whereas with autism, the obsessiveness tends not to feel that way. Like the internal obsessiveness is often things that autistic people say, well, I wouldn't want to lose this. I don't want to cure that part of me. I love my special interests. I love my routines. These feel good to me. This feels like home.
Mhm.
Whereas with OCD people, they're like, I want to stop doing the rituals. Please, how do I
Yeah.
stop doing the rituals?
Yeah.
OCD people tend to be far more superstitious than autistic people.
Oh yeah.
Autism is like anti-superstition in a lot of ways, where hyper skepticism is a huge barrier for autistic people joining Christianity.
Mhm.
That is not the same with OCD. You know,
Mhm.
the there's a tweet I think about a lot. I can't quote it exactly, but it's like, God gave you the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, but me the swag, and in brackets OCD, to change everything with magic rituals. And
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, and so like that's like a really big key difference with just like people with autism and OCD both have their superstitious rituals, but if you only have autism, you will probably not have superstitious rituals. Whereas if you have OCD, you will probably have lots of superstitious rituals.
And it is
And
interesting to sort of like one of the interesting things about like becoming religious after you have OCD is you kind of do have like an internal lens on the difference between superstition and religion
yes,
and the difference between conscience and like being a little nuts.
yes.
Although
Um,
that's really hard.
and sort of related to that being a little nuts, people with OCD tend to be a lot more into like the idea of re-enchantment and like the whole
Oh,
re-enchantment and remystify. And people who only have autism are like, no, what are we doing here, guys?
well, the
We're not
problem,
re-enchanting anything.
yeah,
We can't go back to medieval thinking.
the stupid thing is that like I've described OCD and scrupulosity as like it's way too freaking enchanted. And yet at the same time, yeah, I'm a re-enchantment sis, totally.
Yes, yes. And so the autistic people who are into re-enchantment tend to also have OCD. um, but if you're missing that magic OCD component, the chances that you will be into like woo, as I will call it, is significantly lower. And so like the magical thinking aspect of it is not nearly as common with autistic Christians as it is with OCD Christians.
So this is why Dominicans exist. I honestly, they're like,
Yep.
they're like the disenchanted, like a hyper supernatural theological, but extremely disenchanted way of being a Christian. I do wonder whether post rationalists tend to be both OCD and autistic, and rationalists tend to be just autistic.
That is likely. I haven't looked into it. However, like my general intuition would be people who just have autism are far more likely to not get disenchanted with rationalism and then leave.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have the combo, your ability to stay in those spaces will become less.
Mhm.
So I left the EA scene because my mild OCD could not handle it,
Mhm.
and I was like paralyzed and couldn't buy a coffee without thinking I'd killed people.
Obviously.
Um,
Checks
super
out.
rational thinking.
Yep.
Editing, John here. You know what? Listening back to that, that does sound like super rational thinking. And if you agree with me, this podcast is running a fundraiser for the Against Malaria Foundation. The Against Malaria Foundation is a very efficient charity that uses your dollars very well to save lives. We are above $25,000 in funds donated to the Against Malaria Foundation. If you have found this podcast useful or anything I do useful, please consider donating to the Against Malaria Foundation. I will leave the link for the podcast donation campaign below. Anyway, malaria nets. Buy them instead of coffee, or don't if you have OCD. Transition. But yeah, like, so a lot of rationalist communities and just like in general high demand religious
Mhm.
groups, and I think like EA's, while not necessarily a high demand religious group, mimic
Also
many
a
of the
high demand
patterns.
music. I have a
Yes.
question. I have a question for you. For me, it's not that finding out that other people experience this fixed it, but it was incredibly helpful. And the first person
Yes.
was my dad. Did you experience that with autism? Did you experience that with the
Yes.
minor bit of OCD that you have? And how does that work? Because you've described like not having an I thou relationship easily. And for
Yep.
me, that sense of like joy and relief and company is very related to my experience of I thou relationships. So how does
Yeah.
that work with you?
I basically went from age 12 to 16 thinking that something was fundamentally broken and wrong with me, and
Mhm,
that it was broken in a way that was unique, and that
mhm,
there was no way out of it,
mhm,
and that I was just wrong in some way, and
mhm.
there was nothing I can do. And I felt an immense amount of relief when I found out what Asperger syndrome was,
Yeah.
because I went from having no answers to why I was this weird freak who couldn't get along with anyone and who couldn't understand things and who missed things that my siblings could easily pick up on. And like I remember distinctly at age 12 having the thought that like, oh, in the same way that some of my classmates can't do math and seem like sort of hard locked out of it
Uh-huh,
cognitively, I realized that I was hard locked out of certain things socially, cognitively.
uh-huh.
And at age 12, I just started developing this sense of horror that humans are a social species and that I was going to be locked out of those things for the rest of
Mhm,
my life for reasons I could not understand.
mhm.
And learning I had autism was like getting a decryption key
Yeah,
to my life, in that it was like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing here. This
yeah,
is what makes sense. Thank God. Like, this is finally stuff is starting to make sense. And then I was able to, like, the huge experience of autism is feeling like you're an alien that's landed on the wrong planet,
Uh-huh.
and you look like a human, but you know that other people around you just aren't like you, and
Hmm.
they feel like an alien species, and you watch them and observe their rituals, and you're like, just please don't figure out that I'm an alien. And then I remember when I learned what Asperger's was, going on the internet and searching it up and finding the autism forum at the time,
Hmm.
which was wrongplanet.net,
Oh,
which was, and I was like, oh, I'm not a weird freak. I have autism. And then I was like, okay, I am a weird freak and I have autism.
but how was
These
that?
things aren't mutually exclusive, but
I mean, that was so my experience with OCD. I
yeah,
mean, very different because there's not a sense of being on the wrong planet or being an alien or like decrypting things. It's like, what is wrong? Like, what is wrong with me? Like, is there something supernatural wrong with me?
yeah,
Is there like, am I being lazy? Am I being like, it's just totally baffling.
yeah,
But the diagnosis was incredibly freeing, but there was also a sense of, it was not that strong, but it was also strong of like when I talking to other people who had this, there was a sense of like I'm not alone.
yeah.
Was that an aspect of it for you? For with autism?
Yes, yes. I still feel like, I guess solidarity and suffering is the closest way that I
Mhm.
could explain it, where it's not like, oh, I finally found my people. To an
Uh-huh.
extent, I feel
Yeah.
like I've finally found my people, because I'm like, finally, I don't need to like pretend. I don't need to do
Mhm,
the
mhm.
weird social rituals that I don't understand, because they also do weird social rituals that they don't understand,
Yeah.
and we both go, oh, we can just drop all this.
Yeah, you can just relate directly.
Yeah, and then we could just start like mind melding,
Yeah.
and that's not, again, that's not with all autistic people
Mhm.
as well. It's like only with a certain subset of ones that are have autism in the same way I do. Autism has like really spiky profiles to it.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so sometimes if your spikes
It
don't
does
align,
overlap. Yeah, it
yeah.
doesn't
And
help.
so there's that, but there's also just like, there is there's a Sun Tzu quote, and
Mhm,
it's like, if you know your enemy, or if you
mhm,
know yourself but not your enemy, you will lose the battle. If you know your enemy but not yourself, for every battle you win, you will suffer a defeat. But if you know yourself and your enemy,
mhm,
and you'll be unstoppable. It's something like
mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And that was a very large part of it, because I was
Mhm,
like, I did not know myself prior to this, and now I know myself in a way that I had previously not been able to know myself, because I also have very high levels of alexithymia.
what does that
uh,
mean?
that is the inability to internally decode your own emotions.
Interesting.
And so I was not able to differentiate between extreme emotions like happiness and sadness and things like that. Like the
Wow.
internal feeling, or like happiness and anxiety, or anger and anxiety. It's all just like a very hard to decipher mess. And so knowing it was autism allowed me to it allowed me to build the introspective tool set
Mhm,
that I needed in order to do the necessary work to overcome the challenges that I was
mhm,
facing. And so like, I encourage people to get diagnosed with autism if I think they have it, because it helped me so
mhm,
much, just because I was like, I am now able to identify the problem that I am dealing with. And before, I had no idea what problem I was dealing with. And so I spent years concocting strategies to deal with my problems, and all of them failed because
mhm,
they all were the wrong strategies,
mhm,
because they weren't informed by having autism. I
mhm,
didn't know I had I didn't know I was like I didn't know it was social cues that I was missing. I knew something was wrong socially because I kept saying the wrong things, but I didn't
mhm,
realize is because I was like not properly interpreting them, and then they were interpreting me, and I wasn't giving them the signals that they expected me to
Mhm.
give off. So they were reading. I didn't know that was happening.
That's
And then
so interesting.
I learned I had autism, and I quickly put two and two together. And the rate at which I socially improved between the ages of 16 to 20 is so stark that people who knew me when I was 16 and then knew me when I was 20 were like, you are essentially a different person.
That's
um,
fascinating.
and like when I first went to military college versus when I graduated,
Mhm.
people were like, it is wild how much of a different person you seem to
Uh-huh.
be. Um, and like I had a few women in my young adults church group say
Mhm.
that to me, and I
Uh-huh.
was like, I don't know how to take that, but I'm glad.
I'm not sure if that's a compliment or a
Yes,
deep insult, but we here
I
we
I think they meant it as a compliment,
are.
but
Yeah.
like, and so that's what it felt to me, and like, yeah, it is just comforting knowing, okay, there is a name for this,
Yeah.
right? Just
Oh my
even
god.
even just having a name that you can call what you're experiencing,
Yeah. Rather
whereas
than like
before,
I'm crazy or I'm bad
yeah, and
or
and it's
like
like,
or just the world is crazy or something.
yeah, and I internalized a lot of what were autism symptoms as moral failing. And so when I got autism, I realized, oh, this isn't a moral failing. I just struggle with people. And so like I spend a holiday with my family, and pretty much a constant trend with my family whenever we'd go on vacation is about 4 days in, I would start to have a monumental crash out. Um, right? It always happened at around day 4 or 5 where I just couldn't handle it anymore, and I would start freaking out. I wouldn't know why I was freaking out, and I was like, this is a moral failing. I don't know why I'm doing this. I couldn't understand why I was doing it. And then I got the answer. And
Mhm.
it was like, oh, I have autism, and I have hypersensitivity to many things that I didn't realize.
Mhm.
And I was like bottling it up the
Mhm.
entire time, and also constantly socializing and in close proximity with my family all the
Mhm.
time. And I had no place to decompress. And eventually, like, the pressure cooker just exploded,
Mhm.
basically. And I was like, oh, this is not a moral failing. This is a coping strategy failure.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I should just build better coping strategies.
I do have to go. This was fantastic. I'm yeah, this is great. Thank you for this.
Yes, it was a very good conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
I hope it was
And
helpful. I hope it described to people what we're talking about. And if anyone
I
wants to
hope it
get in touch
does
with me,
too.
that was fine. I'm very
Yep.
open to people being like, I think I have this, or I have to talk to you about Calvinism for 8 hours, but I won't let you do that. But
Yeah, so if someone wants to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
um, so I'm at Susania on Twitter, Suzania. So DM slide me, or if you can't get to the DMs because I'm not following you, just at me and I'll follow you. I
Cool.
think probably.
And if you would like to talk to me, you can email me, christianityonthespectrum@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at christianityon, and you can find me on Blue Sky at christianityon.bluesky.social. You can also join our Discord group, where they will talk you out of your OCD spirals for buying a jacket in the middle of a Canadian winter. Uh, and if you'd like to support the podcast, you can donate to the Podcasts Against Malaria Foundation fundraiser that will be linked into the description. Also, I have a Substack called Dispatches from the Autism Wars, and my username on there is also Christianity on, or Christianity on the Spectrum. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, Susannah. I'd love to have you back on to chat
I'm
about other
sure
things in the
I'm
future.
sure there are other things that we can chat about.
Many, many things. All right. See ya.
Okay, ciao.